This video is now in session, and Wisconsin has a Senate race in 2022. And the special thing about this race, out of all the competitive races that are happening in the midterm Senate, is that Ron Johnson is up for re-election. It's that there is a Republican incumbent that could run up for re-election. If we look at all the competitive races, on the Republican side, we can see that many of those seats are not going to have incumbent advantages. For example, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and as well as North Carolina. All of those three seats are competitive, and that's partly because there is no Republican incumbent in any of those three seats. But for Wisconsin, there is an incumbent, so it should seem like that Wisconsin should keep going for the Republican Party, except first, Ron Johnson hasn't completely decided whether he will run for re-election or not. And the other thing is that Ron Johnson is a very polarizing figure. If we look at the timeline between the 2020 election and until right now, Ron Johnson has heavily shifted in his rhetoric towards the right, towards the direction of Trump-style rhetoric, and he has shifted more towards conspiracy theories and as well as subverting the 2020 election, and as well as downplaying January 6th, among just being more of a wacky figure when it comes to those kinds of events. So with that, Democrats are poised to run good candidates against Ron Johnson, who seems like a really big risk come 2022, and he is at a very big risk, which is why he has not quite declared himself that he would be running for the 2022 election. He's 66 years old. He could very well run for another 6-year term. I mean, senators, a lot of senators have gone longer than Ron Johnson. Robert Byrd, for example, went into his 90s. Chuck Grassley could go to his 90s. Patrick Leahy also could go to his 90s. But Ron Johnson is 66. He's nowhere near that age. And so he's not debating whether to run because of his age, but more because of his rhetoric. Because he has become such a polarizing figure, it doesn't bode well for his chances in Wisconsin, which is why he's not adamant on declaring to run. And this may be one of the only seats for the Republicans where if the incumbent senator retires, that may be a good thing, because Ron Johnson has shown that he's pretty shaky when it comes to elections. When we look at the 2010 election, he was able to be elected because of a red wave, because 2010 was a Tea Party revolution. He won with 51.9% of the vote against Russ Feingold. And then 2016, he lucked out because of two reasons. First of all, because Donald Trump was running in 2016, and he won the state of Wisconsin. And the other thing is that Russ Feingold was running again. Usually, incumbent senators who are defeated in a general election, if they run again during the next election of that senator's term, they usually don't win that election. We've seen this multiple times, but if you've been denied by your constituents once, you're most likely not going to get a change in heart by your constituents the next time around. So Ron Johnson was able to luck out from those situations, from those circumstances in 2010 and 2016. But in 2022, it's a much different environment because there is not that Tea Party wave movement, at least not as of now. And it seems like Joe Biden will get a lot of stuff done in his first 2 years as president that are pretty bipartisan, like infrastructure, which would increase the Democrats' popularity both in the presidency and as well as on the generic side of polling. So Ron Johnson is in a worse condition than 2016 and 2010. So with that, he's debating whether to run or not. But let's say he does run. Let's say he does declare himself to run for the Republican primary. He is almost certainly going to win that primary because of the Republican voters in Wisconsin. Many of them are very conservative, and Ron Johnson is also very conservative in his rhetoric, culturally speaking. Donald Trump also endorsed him for the 2022 U.S. Senate, which should give him a big boost, and that's why you don't really see anyone else declaring to run for the Republican primary. It's all just potential candidates because it is determinative. Because it is determined by Ron Johnson running for the U.S. Senate for re-election or not running. And then the other thing is that he would have to face off a Democrat in the general election. And on the Democratic side, as I mentioned before, they have good candidates, most notably Mandela Barnes, who is currently the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, and as well as Tom Nelson, who is the Outagamie county executive. And both are pretty good candidates. Tom Nelson, he did run for multiple races before, and he failed in multiple races. But ultimately, he is still a pretty good candidate against Ron Johnson. He was the nominee for the 8th district of Wisconsin, and obviously, it's very hard for a Democrat to beat to win in a Republican plus 10 district. If you look here, last time this district voted for a Democrat for president was Obama in 2008, but in every other years they voted for a Republican, and you can see here the last time a Democrat was in office was between 2007, when Democrats swept the House in 2006, and then 2011 when Republicans had that Tea Party movement, and you can see from there on out it's been Republican ever since. But if we go into this, if we go into here with 2016, you can see that Tom Nelson got 37.3% of the vote, and then you can see in the 2018 election, the Democratic candidate had 36.3% and then 35.8%. So Tom Nelson is above average in recent history for this seat, so that bodes well for him. He's not the best candidate though, because he also has been nominees multiple times, and if he's lost in practically all of them, no matter how hard it was to win those seats, it doesn't really look good on him. In terms of Mandela Barnes, though, he is currently the lieutenant governor, and he was able to win as lieutenant in his lieutenant governor campaign in the 2018 election. If we go over here, you can see that the pair, Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes, won against an incumbent governor, an incumbent lieutenant governor. They were able to win, which is pretty hard because Scott Walker has shown that he is able to win in Wisconsin elections, even though he is a polarizing figure. If we look at the 2014 election, he was able to win in that one by 52.3%. In the 2012 election, he was able to win by 53.1%, and then here he was able to win by 52.3%. Now, this is partly helped by the fact in this recall election that the Democratic nominee was the same as the one in 2010, but Scott Walker nonetheless has shown to win in elections. So the fact that Mandela Barnes and Tony Evers were able to win as a pair and defeat an incumbent is pretty notable for Wisconsin, and that puts him in a very good position to beat Ron Johnson come 2022. Ron Johnson, the fact that he's becoming more and more in the direction of Trump in terms of cultural matters, it doesn't indicate well for him, because the 2020 election, even though people can say that it was fake, nonetheless, the results are clear, which is that Joe Biden won in Wisconsin, albeit it was a tilt margin, but nonetheless, more Wisconsins voted for Joe Biden rather than for Donald Trump. And with Joe Biden making progress on infrastructure and as well as other things. Most notably, as of now, infrastructure. There's not really much else he can do at this moment for bipartisan matters. But infrastructure by itself is very good for a lot of these candidates who can campaign on that and can campaign on the fact that Democrats are able to make progress in legislation, because one of the major problems for the Democrats is not that it's not that their policies are bad per se, and that's a very debatable question, but it's rather that Democrats are not able to do anything when they're in power. When we look at the Obama years, Obama wasn't able to do as much as Democrats wanted to, and that led to gridlock. And in 2014, that led to a Republican Senate. And then if we look at 2020, or not 2020, if we look at Bill Clinton's years, he lost a lot of seats in Congress because of inaction by Democrats. So Joe Biden, by passing these bipartisan bills, he's at least getting some action done, which would heavily help these Democratic candidates in Rust Belt states that are transitioning more towards a Republican territory. And if Mandela Barnes or Tom Nelson wins the Democratic primary and if Ron Johnson wins the Republican primary, we would be more inclined to say that Democrats have a very good chance of winning this seat in 2022. But let's just say that Ron Johnson doesn't run. Then you have other candidates that could run. The problem is none of them have really jump-started on their campaign processes. And as of now, the candidates aren't that notable. You have Sean Duffy, you have Michael Gallagher, and then you also have the lieutenant governor, or the former lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, Rebecca Kleefisch. And all of these candidates are okay because they have held offices before. The thing is, though, for Sean Duffy, he comes from Wisconsin 7th District, which is an R+12, and then Mike Gallagher comes from an R+10 district. Now, if Mike Gallagher does run and wins the Republican primary, and if Tom Nelson wins the Democratic primary, that would be pretty interesting. But because both of them have ran against each other before in 2016, but that's not the point. The point is who can replace Ron Johnson. It's not really, I guess, clear cut as to who can replace Ron Johnson. And that's a problem because Republicans are getting less and less time. And Ron Johnson, unfortunately for the Republicans, he has delayed his announcement of whether he's going to run or not. So as a result, all of these other Republicans are waiting to see if he will run. And if he doesn't run, then that's lost time for a lot of these Republicans, while the Democrats are already jump-starting on their voter turnout campaign. And a lot of these individuals have voting operations on the ground already underway. So for the Republicans, if Ron Johnson doesn't run, they need to find someone quick. And out of these candidates, they're not super notable. The most notable is Scott Walker, who declined. He's not going to run for any office in 2022. So with that, it's very hard to see how Republicans could get a notable candidate. It will still be a competitive race come the general election, but Republicans would have to ride on some kind of national red wave here, or the Republicans would have to make 2022, nationally speaking, somewhat of a red wave year in order to win in this election, just because of how Ron Johnson kind of is screwing the Republican Party in Wisconsin. The Democratic Party, no doubt, will have competition in their primary, which could deviate some of the much-needed attention towards the general election, but there's only two good candidates as of now, which means that it's not going to be a big competition like we've seen in the 2020 presidential election or the 2018 Florida governor's election. So that's the status of the Wisconsin race right now. In terms of the polls, Tom Nelson, there's only one poll. It's a Democratic pollster sponsored by Tom Nelson. And in this poll, Tom Nelson wins by 4%, but he doesn't win by a majority of the votes, so that's pretty notable. Nonetheless, you can see here with these three predictions, the Cook Political Report currently ranks this seat as toss-up, Inside Elections ranks this seat as a battleground, and Sabato's Crystal Ball ranks it as a lean Republican seat. For Cook Political Report, they use tilt margins. Sabato's Crystal Ball does not use tilt. They only start from lean and then go from lean to likely to safe. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.